The best cigar in the world might not be Cuban. And the worst Cuban cigar I ever smoked? It cost a small fortune. Now, before the comment section lights itself on fire, just stay with me for a second. Are Cuban cigars actually better? Or have we all just inherited an opinion that nobody really wants to question out loud anymore? Because in this hobby, some topics are treated less like preferences and more like commandments.
Welcome to the Cigar and Whiskey Podcast, where every episode takes you deeper into the stories, traditions, and flavors that make cigars and spirits unforgettable. So pour a glass, light a stick, and settle in.
All right, welcome back. I'm your host, Bo Kauffmann, and today we're walking straight into one of the biggest debates in the cigar world. No warm-up stretch, no easing into it, just straight into the fire. Now, I didn't want to sit here and argue with myself for 15 minutes. I mean, I could. I've done it before. It's not productive, and frankly, it makes me look slightly unhinged. So, I brought in reinforcement. Joining me in the studio is my co-host, Abby Inglewood, who has generously agreed to keep me honest and maybe challenge a few of my assumptions.
Hi, Bo. I'm here to represent the curious smoker, the skeptical smoker, and maybe the slightly tired smoker who keeps hearing that Cubans are automatically better and isn't entirely convinced anymore.
Perfect. That's exactly the energy we need, because this topic gets emotional fast. There's history wrapped up in it. Prestige, scarcity, national pride, and somewhere underneath all of that, actual tobacco and craftsmanship. So let's start simple, Abby. Before we even get into flavor, construction, price tags, or bragging rights, why do Cuban cigars have this towering reputation in the first place?
Because from the outside looking in, it almost feels like the answer is just, well, because they're Cuban. And that can't possibly be the whole story, right?
Exactly. And that's what we're going to unpack today. Not with fanboy energy, not with anti-Cuba energy, just with some honest perspective from someone who's spent real time smoking on both sides of that debate. By the end of this episode, you may still love Cuban cigars. You may still prefer Dominican or Nicaraguan, but at least you'll know whether you're choosing based on experience or mythology. And if you've got strong feelings already, good. Hang on to them. We'll circle back mid-episode, and I want to hear what your experience has actually been, not just what you've heard repeated online. So, Abby, let's rewind the clock a bit. Before embargoes, before scarcity, before the mystique took on a life of its own, where did this reputation really begin?
Okay, so let's rewind this. Why Cuba? Why did they become the gold standard in the first place? Was it really about quality, or did they just get there first?
It's a mix of both, honestly. But before we roll our eyes at the hype, we have to admit something. For a long time, Cuba was the center of the premium cigar universe. If you go back to the late 1800s and early 1900s, Cuban tobacco had a reputation that wasn't hype. It wasn't branding. It was earned in the fields and at the rolling tables. The soil in regions like Vuelta Abajo was exceptional, the climate was ideal, and the knowledge was passed down through generations. Fathers teaching sons, families perfecting technique over the decades. And here's the part that's easy to forget. There wasn't the kind of competition we see today. Nicaragua wasn't yet a global powerhouse. The Dominican Republic hadn't become the precision machine it is now. Honduras wasn't even in the premium conversation. So if you were a businessman in London or New York in 1910 and you wanted the best cigar money could buy, it was Cuban. That was the reference point. That was the benchmark. Everything else got compared to it. And when something becomes the benchmark early, that reputation sticks. Even if the rest of the world catches up later, the original standard continues to live in people's minds. Then 1962 happens. The embargo. And this is where things stop being just about tobacco and start being about psychology. Because once Americans couldn't legally buy Cuban cigars anymore, they didn't just become scarce. They became forbidden. And nothing increases perceived value faster than being told you can't have something. I remember the first time I ever saw someone pull out a Cuban at a gathering. The room changed. People leaned in. Not because they'd tasted it yet, just because of the band. Meanwhile, a lot of the talent left Cuba, master blenders, families with generations of experience. They set up shop in Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic and quietly started building world-class cigars elsewhere. But the legend had already taken root. For decades, people had internalized the idea that Cuban meant premium. And once a belief like that settles in, it takes a long time and a lot of smoking to reevaluate it.
So what you're saying is the early reputation was earned, but over time, politics and scarcity poured gasoline on it. The story kept growing, even as the rest of the world got very, very good.
Exactly. The original excellence was real. That's important to say. But the mythology layered on top of it? That's where this conversation starts getting interesting. And maybe a little uncomfortable.
All right, history aside, let's talk taste, not legacy, not politics. When someone lights up a Cuban cigar, is it actually better on the palate? Or is that just something we've all agreed to say?
This is where things get complicated because taste is personal. And the moment you say that out loud, someone somewhere clutches their humidor like you've insulted their ancestry. Cuban cigars do have a recognizable profile. There's often that slightly tangy, earthy, mineral note people call the Cuban twang. When it's good, it's really good. Balanced, refined. It doesn't shout at you. It kind of unfolds slowly. But here's where expectations mess with people. A lot of smokers hear Cuban and assume it means bold, heavy, powerhouse strength. Most of the time, that's not what you're getting. You're getting medium body, nuance, and elegance. I remember lighting up my first really hyped Cuban. I had built it up in my head for years. I expected fireworks, choir music, a life-changing moment. About halfway through, I thought, okay, this is very good. But is it twice as good? And that's the dangerous part. When you've paid a premium, waited for the experience, maybe even traveled to get it, your brain wants it to feel extraordinary. Expectation quietly leans into the tasting process. Now, that doesn't mean Cuban cigars aren't exceptional. I've had some that were absolutely gorgeous. Creamy transitions, subtle spice, this layered evolution that felt effortless. You sit back and think, all right, now I understand. But I've also had some that were just good, not bad, not disappointing, just good. And when you remove the mystique and just judge what's in your hand, you start asking different questions. Meanwhile, Nicaraguan cigars today can be bold, rich, peppery, dramatic. Dominican cigars can be incredibly smooth and precise, almost surgical in their consistency. Honduras brings its own character entirely. So when someone says Cuban is better, I always want to ask, better for who? Better compared to what? If you love strength and intensity, a Cuban might feel restrained. If you love nuance and balance, it might feel perfect. The word better does a lot of work in this debate. Sometimes what people really mean is different, or traditional, or nostalgic. And those are valid reasons to love something.
So it's not that Cuban cigars automatically win. It's that they offer a specific style. And if that style lines up with your palate, it can feel unbeatable. But if it doesn't, the magic might not land.
Exactly. And that's when the conversation shifts from objective quality to personal preference, which honestly makes this whole debate way more interesting and way less absolute.
All right, so let's talk about something a little less romantic. I've heard people say Cuban cigars can actually be inconsistent. Tight draw, burn issues, construction problems. Is that exaggerated or is that real?
It's real. And this is where the conversation starts getting uncomfortable because people don't like criticizing icons. All cigars, including Cubans, are still handmade. That's part of the charm. But handmade also means variability. And over the years, especially during periods of high demand and lower resources, quality control hasn't always been perfect. I've had Cubans with razor-sharp burns and perfect draws, absolute pleasure to smoke. And I've had others that needed touch-ups, relights, or felt plugged halfway through. When that happens on an everyday cigar, you shrug it off. When it happens on something you paid a premium for, it stings a little more. Now compare that to many modern Dominican and Nicaraguan factories. Some of them are running with incredibly tight quality control. Draw testing, humidity monitoring, precision systems that reduce inconsistency dramatically. That doesn't mean non-Cubans never have issues. Of course they do. But statistically, you're often getting more predictability outside of Cuba today. And here's the tricky part. If someone smokes one Cuban with a tight draw, they might say, see, they're overrated. If someone smokes one perfect Cuban, they might say, nothing else compares. One experience can anchor an opinion. Consistency matters, especially for newer smokers. If you're just getting into cigars and your expensive purchase tunnels or won't draw properly, you're not thinking about terroir. You're thinking, why did I spend this much?
So part of this debate isn't even about flavor. It's about reliability. People want to know that when they light up, the cigar is going to perform the way it's supposed to.
Exactly. Romance is wonderful. History is powerful. But if a cigar won't burn properly, none of that matters in the moment. Construction is the foundation, and without it, even great tobacco can't shine. And this is where the debate shifts again. Because now we're not just asking if Cuban cigars taste better. We're asking whether you're paying for performance or prestige.
And I have a feeling that's where this conversation is about to get even more interesting.
It is. Because once we start talking about price, scarcity, and what people are really paying for, the temperature goes up a notch. Before we go any further, we're going to take a quick pause. And when we come back, we're stepping into the part of this conversation that usually makes people shift in their seats a little. Because now we're going to talk about price, scarcity, prestige, and whether some of what people are paying for has more to do with psychology than tobacco. We're also going to tackle whether modern non-Cuban cigars have quietly closed the gap, or maybe even passed Cuba in certain areas. That's where opinions start getting sharp. And before we do that, I want to hear from you. If you've smoked Cuban cigars, were they everything you expected, better than expected, or did they leave you wondering what the fuss was about? When we come back, we're pulling the band off the mystique and looking at what you're actually buying. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Cigar and Whiskey Podcast, your companion for cigar culture, whiskey wisdom, and everything in between. Want more? Visit us anytime at cigarandwhiskeyguide.com for articles, reviews, and pairing tips.
So let's talk about the part nobody really likes to admit, the money. The second we start talking about Cuban cigars, price enters the room, whether we want it to or not. And price changes how we experience things.
Okay, but careful. That sounds like you're about to say people are fooling themselves. Are you saying Cuban smokers are just paying for a logo?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's complicated, and we're all human. When something is rare, restricted, harder to get, it feels special before you even light it. That's not stupidity. That's psychology. And I'm just as susceptible to it as anyone else. I've watched someone pull out a Cuban at a gathering, and the atmosphere shifts instantly. Heads turn, conversations pause, and the cigar hasn't even been cut yet. That's power. Now, does that mean the cigar isn't excellent? Of course not. But part of what you're buying is the experience of holding an iconic object. The band carries weight before the first draw. And when you pay a premium, your expectations climb right along with that price. The more you spend, the more you want that moment to justify itself.
But isn't that true for any luxury product? Wine, watches, cars. The more exclusive it is, the more people want it.
Exactly. And cigars are no different. Exclusivity fuels desire. Desire shapes perception. And perception absolutely influences how something tastes in the moment. Here's what's interesting, though. In countries where Cuban cigars are widely available, where they're just another option in the humidor, the mystique isn't always as intense. They're respected. They're enjoyed. But they're not always worshipped the way they are in places where they're harder to access. That tells you something important. When access becomes normal, the legend cools a little. People start judging more with their palate than with the story wrapped around it.
So now we're not just asking if Cuban cigars are better. We're asking what better even means. Is it flavor, construction, or the feeling of holding something historic?
Exactly. And that's where this gets uncomfortable for some people. Because if what you love is the ritual, the symbolism, the heritage, Cuban cigars might absolutely deliver something unmatched. But if you strip it down to performance and flavor alignment, the playing field today is a lot more level than it used to be. And that's where opinions start to get sharp.
Okay, so let's make this real. If someone lives in the U.S. and can't legally buy Cuban cigars, are they actually missing out on something essential? Or is that fear mostly in their head?
That question matters more than people admit. And the honest answer is no. You're not missing out on some secret tier of greatness that only exists in one place. The global premium cigar market is incredibly strong today. Nicaragua produces bold, expressive blends that can rival anything. The Dominican Republic has become almost surgical in its consistency. Honduras brings depth and strength that surprises people. And here's something that gets overlooked. A lot of those cigars use Cuban seed tobacco grown in different soil. The genetics didn't disappear. They migrated. They adapted. They evolved under modern production standards. I've smoked Nicaraguans that absolutely floored me. Perfect draw, rich transitions, clean burn. I've smoked Dominicans that were so smooth and balanced, they felt effortless the entire way through. That doesn't diminish Cuba's legacy. It just means excellence isn't geographically exclusive anymore. If you build a humidor full of great non-Cubans, you're not settling. You're participating in a world-class market.
So the pedestal might still exist, but it's not the only place greatness lives anymore.
Exactly. The premium cigar world has matured, and that's a very good thing for smokers everywhere.
All right, no more hedging. If someone corners you and says, Bo, yes or no, are Cuban cigars actually better? What do you say?
My honest answer? Sometimes. And I know that's not the dramatic headline people want. If you value tradition, heritage, and the symbolism of smoking something that helped define this entire hobby, then yes, Cuban cigars can feel special in a way that's hard to replicate. If you value consistency, predictable performance, and price-to-experience ratio, then no, not automatically. The rest of the world has caught up in very real ways. If rarity excites you, if exclusivity adds something emotional to the ritual, then Cuban cigars absolutely carry weight. That part is real. But if you strip it down to pure flavor alignment with your palate, better becomes entirely personal. I've had unforgettable Cubans. I've also had non-Cubans I would choose again without hesitation. That's not betrayal, that's just experience.
So maybe the better question isn't whether Cuban cigars are superior. Maybe it's what kind of smoker you are and what experience you're chasing.
Exactly. Once you remove ego from the equation, the conversation becomes healthier. Cuban cigars aren't automatically better. They're historically iconic. They helped shape what premium cigars became. But today, excellence isn't confined to one island. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Smoke what you love. Appreciate the history, respect the craftsmanship everywhere, and don't let mythology make your decisions for you. If you're watching on YouTube, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next debate. If you're listening on the podcast, follow the show wherever you get your episodes. And tell us, in your experience, are Cuban cigars actually better, or has the rest of the world caught up? Next week, we're tackling another sacred cow. Stay with us, and say goodnight, Abby.
Good night, Abby. Thanks for listening to the Cigar and Whiskey podcast. Subscribe and share with a fellow aficionado, and keep the journey going at cigarandwhiskeyguide.com, where every puff and pour has a story.